Good morning. Welcome to this year's open house of mid-century modern architecture in Urbana-Champaign. Anna Sapochnikov has invited me to say a couple of words about the dance that she and her collaborators just performed here in the First Presbyterian Church of Urbana, designed by the architect A. Richard Williams, starting in the late 1950s and built between 1961 and 1964, that we have the great honor to be in this morning. I first met Anna a little more than a year and a half ago during the exhibition Making Place for the Arts at Home that I hope many of you saw at the Krannert Art Museum. Like, who was there? I was one of the co-curators of that exhibition, and while I've only been in Urbana-Champaign for about almost 3 years now, I do live in a Jack Baker house, and working on that exhibition was an incredible introduction to this neighborhood and its traditions of experimentation and connections amongst the various forms of arts here. And that was the lesson from Making Place for the Arts at Home, and Anna's interaction with that exhibition, her performance at that exhibition, her continued engagement with the architects and the spaces designed that draws on the tradition of mid-century experimentation and avant-garde and arts, dance, music, and theater that is a part of the lifeblood of this community. And it is incredibly inspiring to see her and her collaborators. So there's Anna, Jan Urquhart performed today, Nicole Marini performed today, Roxanne Dorleon-Juste performed today, Laura Chiaramonte performed today and did the camera work, and then Elliot Riza Imadian did the sound for the performance that you heard today. The collaboration amongst those people in sound, dance, movement, visual arts really is something that makes Urbana-Champaign what it is, and it certainly contributes to the architectural culture of this place as well. There's one other thing I want to say about the Good Housekeeping performance, and I have like a tear in my eye every time I see this performance in a different space. It's been performed at the Krannert Art Museum, at the Erlinger House, which is a part of our open house today, at the Hessel Park Church, which is a part of our open house today, in my home, in this church now, in so many places across our community, and I hope many more, not to make more work for everyone involved. But it's inspired initially by an exercise LP for women published by Good Housekeeping magazine that Anna found and began to explore the sounds and the kind of choreographed way that women at mid-century in the 1950s were allowed to exercise. We may take for granted today that women can exercise kind of however they want, but at the middle of the 20th century, limitation on movement for our health to protect our ability to have children and many other things about constraining our bodies were a part of exercise culture, and that LP is, you heard a little bit of it in the beach ball exercise is a quotation from that LP. Connecting that to the way that domestic spaces also constrain our bodies and expect us to act in certain kinds of ways and give us roles that we must play at home, the way that this church kind of suggests a way that we must behave. Thank you all for sitting nicely in your pews, right? But the experimentation that started with a dancer like Margaret Erlinger, again, whose house is on the tour today, continues through her colleagues and students like Jan Urquhart, who did a really wonderful interview for the exhibition about Margaret and the house, continues to be inspiring. And I hope as we do an event like this, hopefully every year, fingers crossed, that there continues to be this cross-pollination amongst the artists of this community and reminding us of what makes this place really special. So thank you, Anna, and the entire rest of the team. I am Kate Holliday. I am professor of historic preservation and American architectural history. I teach in the School of Architecture in the Department of Landscape Architecture over at the university. And it is my great privilege to have helped in this extremely collaborative effort in getting all of you here together today to look at some great places. This morning we have a panel discussion, and I want to first invite Perry Morris from the Champaign County History Museum to come up and say a welcome and a few words.
I will be very brief so we can get on with the panel discussion. First, most importantly, thank you everyone for supporting this event. It actually turns out it's a fundraiser for the History Museum, as well as a way to get out into the community and see this fabulous architecture. So it's great that it has two purposes. Thanks again for coming. They weren't out when you checked in, but on the way out, please go back by the check-in table and pick up this card from the Farnsworth House. There's a business card size card on the back that will get you a free admission to a guided tour, a $30 value. So if you have any interest in seeing the Farnsworth House, be sure you pick up one of these. So other than, I'm so happy you're here and thanks for your support, I don't have much else to say. So we'll move along with, get the panel discussion going.
So I do want to say one thing really quickly while we get the chairs set up here for our panelists. We are doing this in May because May is Preservation Month. The National Trust for Historic Preservation has designated May as Historic Preservation Month as an opportunity for local organizations around the country to really celebrate historic preservation, what it means to communities, and the kind of stories that we can tell when we're doing historic preservation really well. So this panel and this tour is really about kind of building up some capacity and some love for historic preservation in this area and in this community. And we have some really amazing speakers to help us do that today. I also just want to give you like the capsule history of this church. Again, it's designed by architect Richard Williams. It seems silly to have a slide of the space that you're looking up at in this space, but there we go. Architect Dick Williams, who again taught at the university, designed the College of Education. If you look around carefully, you'll see many things in this building that feel very similar to the College of Education. And I'll just point out a couple of things. Oh, we are set up, so I'll do this really fast. I think this is a building that maybe many people go past on Green Street without necessarily really paying much attention. And this view of the facade also, I think maybe we don't pay enough attention to as well. It's easy to miss kind of the incredible care and attention to this beautiful triangle that's been pushed and pulled forward, like the entrance canopy pushed forward, the window pulled back to create this volumetric expression of the larger space of the interior of the church. It's also easy to walk past a big concrete basin filled with rocks and think, what is that doing there? But if you look up on your way out, you'll see that the drain pipe from the roof extends out through the eaves, and water from the roof pours down into that basin and into the storm sewer, right? Other little details, it's a little bit blocked by the check-in tables, but if you have a chance on the way out, please do turn in this direction in the lobby, and you'll see these incredible terrazzo stairs that are the essence of mid-century modern architecture, this simplified form, new materials used in inventive ways. And again, easy to miss while you're just out going up the stairs. But these kind of details are really what made Dick Williams' work so remarkable and important. What I really actually want to do is introduce our speakers for our panel now, who please come on up. We have three really wonderful historic preservation experts and professionals to join us today. Rachel Leibowitz is a historic preservation professional who knows a ton about our state. She's worked in the State Historic Preservation Office and is now based in Chicago. Anthony Rubano came over from Springfield. He's the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer for the state of Illinois. And then Scott Mahaffey is the Executive Director of the Edith Farnsworth House in Plano, Illinois. And thank you, Scott, and your team for the passes to the Farnsworth House. And I'll just answer the question, yes, if you haven't been to the Edith Farnsworth House, you do want to go. So pick up those passes and head up there for a real treat of a day. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll also say all three of our panelists are alums of our program. I know we have some students out there, and so I'm going to start with a question that is pretty straightforward. I gave very brief introductions to each of you, and I would love, maybe starting with Rachel, if you could just talk a little bit about your experience in preservation, what you think is important about it, and how you got your start, what drew you to it.
Is this on? Can you hear me? So yes, I was a student here. I graduated from the School of Architecture in the Preservation Program in 1999, and I was away for a few years. Then I came back into the PhD program in Landscape Architecture, and I graduated from that in 2008, I think. I've long had an interest in preservation growing up in Chicago, but I would say that my experience in the field's been a bit diverse. I met Kate for the first time when I was working in the State Historic Preservation Office in the state of Texas in Austin. I was there 4 years. I worked with Anthony at the State Historic Preservation Office in Illinois in Springfield for 5 years. I was the deputy there. I've worked for the federal government in preservation. I've been a contractor where I've prepared 2 National Historic Landmark nominations and some Historic District nominations for the National Register. And I even served on the Historic Preservation Commission here in Champaign for 2 years, long ago. But I think we're all involved in preservation anytime we come into a space like this or enjoy our Main Street. We look at the Hotel Royer. There's a lot of preservation successes, and I think we're all part of that here.
I was a student here a very long time ago. I always was interested in architecture, history not so much. So I wanted to do this architecture thing, and I came here for college and quickly realized that I stunk as a designer. My former professor, Jeff Poss, who's in the room, where are you, Jeff? Is he outside? There he is. Can attest to the fact that I was terrible. But I wasn't so bad telling you why your design stunk. So that means let's talk about architectural history and preservation and bureaucracy, as I've come to do for the last 25 years, discussing architecture and why it looks like it does, why it doesn't look like something else. That wound up being incredibly interesting to me, and history then was a corollary to that. I didn't really have much direct interest in it, but because the C word in preservation is context, context is history. So it wound up being that to understand buildings, why they look like they do, why they're put together as they are, history is an important part of that, or context, if you don't want to use the word history. And at the time, this was a fabulous program that integrated history and architecture, and it was just a really great place to put those two together, and then doing what I wound up doing thereafter really uses that skill every day. It's amazing. So it was pretty great. Should I say that out loud? Am I allowed? Okay. And I met Scott when I was a student, soon after, when I was working on an exhibition for Robert Allerton Park, the house. And Scott had done that immediately prior when he was here, even longer ago.
Yeah, not immediately prior. I grew up in Princeton, Illinois. I don't know if any of you know it. It's a small town northwest of here, very historic. My family goes back there several generations. My aunt and uncle moved to Champaign in the 1960s, early 1960s, and those of you who are from Champaign, Urbana, and know this was a very vibrant community. It still is, but I mean, it was a time of great construction, obviously, the 60s and 70s, and there wasn't a lot of modern architecture in Princeton, Illinois, but also we as a family would go to Allerton Park, so that was how, as a kid, I first got introduced to Allerton, and then of course when I came to school here, I actually started in tech theater in set design because I was very interested in the way that environments support narrative, create, a space that tells a story, or the way that existing spaces tell human history, tell stories. Interesting, if you know the Farnsworth House, it's a cornerstone of modernism. I live in a 1904 Lawrence Buck design house. So it doesn't mean that I don't appreciate modernism or that I appreciate modernism any less, but I think those of us who are very interested in architectural history or design history can appreciate good design from any era. So that's kind of my shtick, my spiel, my background.
What do I have to hold this?
You're the middle.
So to follow up on what you were just saying, Scott, about modernism, so we're here today to think about mid-century modernism, largely because it's pretty popular right now. And so it's a good way to get people in for a conversation about preservation. And I'm curious on your perspectives on why do you think that is? Why is mid-century modern so popular at the moment? What is it about that it's appealing?
I'd like
Speculate.
it for a very long time.
Speculate, yeah. Great, so that, we're starting with you for that reason. Yeah.
Oh, great. I've always enjoyed the simplicity of it, but that's not a good word because it's not simple. It's rather sophisticated, and the volumetric engagement, which is what we were watching earlier, is so much a part of mid-century architecture from its conception that the way you engage a space, move through it, within it, behind it, above it, behind the screen there, or on the balcony, the perspective of your perspective of the place changes and is enriched by it. It's not so much, not that there's anything wrong with it, a facade-based architecture where you see, Charles Platt's beautiful facade, and then, okay, you turn around and there's another beautiful facade, and then you leave. It's less about that picture-perfect presentation of a composition and more about the object in space as more of a sculptural participation and understanding the architecture. And that always was very fascinating to me. It begs you to move around it and engage it. And in certain aspects of modernism, particularly brutalism, which is also having a moment, the uncomfortableness that it makes the user feel is part of the ornament, shall we say. It's part of what the architect is trying to do. It's engaging you by making it difficult. You have to be aware of where you are in a brutalist building because everything looks the same. Your disorientation, the strange proportions that sort of come at you in ways that are less comfortable, that engagement was very valuable to the designers, to the conception of the building. And so it's not passive, and I guess that's what I also like about it. It's challenging, and it makes you, it fosters a relationship whether you like it or not. So whether it's hot or cold, or this window's too big, or there's too much glare, well, yeah, so deal with it, because your participation in this thing is really important. I don't want to say it's ornamental, but to put it in that term, sure. Balconies hanging off of a modernist building that Adolf Loos designed, it's ornament, let's be honest. Mises' columns are ornamental. It's all about, it's all been put there for us to deal with. So the dealing with it winds up being far more satisfying to me in a mid-century interior or building than otherwise.
I was thinking something similar at first when I was making notes about how would I answer that question about why is having a moment. And I think it's the universal space, if you will. It's the fact that it isn't didactic space, although church pews are telling you how to sit but if you removed them, this space is open. It can accommodate dance. It can be it's a community space where we can have a panel like this. I live in a Mies building myself, and so it's that universal space. My neighbors have accommodated their spaces to fit their personal needs, and they're all very different, even though Mies gave us each in our apartment building the same space. People are able to build it out. It's very functional. I don't know that you made it sound kind of menacing or threatening, but I think that
Only when it's leaking.
Yeah. But so to that comment about the leaking, I would say, as Professor Holliday pointed out, how the roof drains here, there's also something very accommodating and inviting about how modernist buildings address the environment and the landscape and bring the landscape into the building, or how the building goes out, how floor surfaces come in, come out, how Views and vistas aren't merely passive views and vistas, but they really bring that environment into the architectural space. I think that that's something that's just very inviting and wonderful, as opposed to some more historicist styles or very didactic expressions. And the other thing I would say is the materials, warm materials, I think, in modernist buildings, expressive, inventive materials. Glulam, it's a marvelous thing, all these inventions and wonders that make modern spaces possible.
I agree with everything you said, but I do think it's market-driven as well. I mean, I think you can blame those of us who are in our 40s, 50s, and 60s for a lot of this. As Anthony will attest to, the stuff that you can't touch anymore was garage sale stuff 30 years ago, and I think we thought it was cool. That history cycle happens. Oftentimes, we dismiss what our parents liked and embrace what our grandparents liked, or there were other reasons, of course, behind that. But I think it was affordability. Mid-century homes were not sought 30 years ago, thought after. They were affordable. Of course, now the pendulum has swung the exact opposite way. But I think if you look at the success of West Elm and other companies all over the world who reproduce important historic mid-century designs, or produce and distribute new designs that are inspired by mid-century design. The one thing I would say, and probably most of you do, if you follow mid-century design magazines, you'll see that modernism or modernist design, and this is touching a little bit upon what Anthony just said about brutalism, but there's mid-century design, certainly, and it depends how you define mid-century, but there's just modernist design in general that will embrace a much broader spectrum. And so I think that in itself is maybe a sign that the pendulum is starting to swing back the other way, that the mid-century modern design craze has probably reached a fever pitch and is probably starting to, and if you look at if you're not a fan of Googie architecture, if you're not a fan of classic mid-century Sputnik design, this may be something that you can attest to, that there is a little bit of a return to more traditional architecture styles and interior design styles. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next decade as these things coalesce.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about the design of this church is looking through some of the materials produced to celebrate anniversaries. There's a story in one of those pamphlets that says that Williams started to work with the congregation in the late 50s on the design, and they initially kind of rejected it because they thought it was too abstract and difficult and not something that really felt like a religious space to them. I think they must have persisted. And I wonder for how many of you, does this feel too abstract? I don't think it really quite does. So I do think the way that we perceive this kind of architecture now has certainly changed since the late 1950s, which is a good thing. We have a much better understanding of it. And yet, at the same time, this pendulum towards more traditional spaces, I know many of our historic churches, many of our historic modern spaces also are perceived to be old-fashioned at this point. And so there is a kind of conversation about how we perceive the history of modernism itself in those conversations.
Well, and let's be honest, the colonial revival never went away. It's the architectural herpes of our culture. So, the people who are in the room are choosing to be in a modern space. So don't ask them. Stop someone on the street and ask if they like this. I bet they wouldn't. So it's all about recognizing the full spectrum of things. And yes, there's a pendulum, but it's a small pendulum in terms of what else is out there. And everything has a pendulum. In the 80s and 90s, mission style and arts and crafts was incredibly expensive and valuable, and prices plummeted. It'll happen with mid-century. What I hope is that the understanding of what it means as pieces of our culture still retain value, and that we still retain appreciation for it.
But I think earlier too, when you were talking about brutalism, brutalism is certainly having that moment now too, but for a lot of people, they just can't stand concrete and they don't see it as beautiful. And I get that, but I'm grabbing the mic because I want you to get close to concrete. It's not good for the environment. I understand it's not the healthiest building material we could choose, but it's beautiful. And it has so much texture and color, and aggregate is everything. And so I want you to get close to some concrete in the next couple of days, check it out, and see if you can love it. Just see if you can. But the other thing in terms of this pendulum, I'm excited to see that younger people are embracing the 70s and the 80s now, and I'm excited for postmodernism to just come raging back and for everyone to just love salmon colored things and turquoise colored things, and I want it, and I know it's coming, so don't sell your Michael Graves stuff just yet, but you'll market that soon. But I'm excited for these. It's nice to see the pendulum swing, actually.
I'm waiting for some diamond plate laminate to become available for my kitchen.
Scott, I want to ask you to talk a little bit about the Edith Farnsworth House. Sure. As an example of like a preservation success, right? We would think, like, this is one of the top 10 buildings in an architectural history survey, and you think it would just be like, of course we will save that. Of course it would be very easy to make sure that we have the Edith Farnsworth House around all the time. But it's not that easy, and so I would love for you to talk about that and the success that you've had.
And also that when I was learning about it, it was the Farnsworth House. Now it's the Edith Farnsworth House. So please tell us about that.
Sure. Yeah, how many, just quick show of hands, how many of you have been there? Okay, so a good third of and certainly everybody pick up a guest pass and come. You're going to spend $30 on gas, so the $30 ticket will help offset that expense. It's worth seeing at least once, at least once, hopefully more often. So the house was built finished in 51, 52, so we're having our 75th birthday this year and next year, for a Chicago kidney research specialist, Dr. Edith Farnsworth. And she used the house as a weekend house. She lived in Chicago, and then she retired to Italy. The house was purchased by Peter Palumbo, who was fairly young at the time, but he became very prominent. And it was initially his American sort of bachelor pad, to be honest, and then it became a family retreat. And then it was sold in 2003. The National Trust and Landmarks Illinois acquired it, and it's been open to the public ever since May 2004. And for the first 15 years, our focus was all about Mies van der Rohe. He only was able to complete 3 private homes in the United States. He's primarily known for, multifamily, for multi-story high-rise buildings, for, office buildings. A lot of his work is in Germany, of course, but a very different style. The Farnsworth House is important to architectural historians because it's really where Mies developed his American style, his sort of pattern book, his sort of, if you look at 860, 880, it's the same column bay spacing as the Farnsworth House. So it was a design build project, and she gave him a long sort of, ramp to do this. I say she, and I keep saying she, because this is what Anthony alluded to, is even after being open to the public for 15 years, we often had people who would take the tour and come away thinking Dr. Farnsworth was a man. So we felt that it was very important to add her first name. And so the site does have some women's history significance, historical significance as well. There are many layers. The past 2 years, we focused on the history of the site itself, which is in some ways much more historically significant than the house. It depends what sort of historical circle you're in. But anyway, that's it.
Yeah, and so expanding on that, I would love everyone else to talk a little bit about some kind of historic preservation wins or good examples of the evolution of historic preservation. I know that often when you say preservation, sometimes there's a glazing over when you're talking to an audience, oh, right, preservation, yep, we're just gonna freeze everything in amber, nothing will ever change again. The example of the Edith Farnsworth House suggests actually we do have the ability to change how we think about preservation, so I would love for some other examples of
And the
creative
win of the
thinking.
Edith Farnsworth House had nothing to do with the state of Illinois or the federal government. It was about nonprofits and their supporters and advocates who saved that from being transported to Japan or wherever it was going to go as a little architectural folly. But really, I'm not the one to ask about architectural wins because the state doesn't save much in that way. It's you in the audience who actually do have the power to save anything. Your ordinances, your desire to have a thing, your purse deciding what house you live in, all of that, that's far more important than any of what the three of us would ever be able to do in our professional positions, I would say. So preservation starts locally and it starts with you. And if you're not there, then there's no preservation. If you call me, it's too late. Now, with that said, I will tell you that one cool thing that I was involved in was the saving of one building. It was Gordon Bunshaft's first commission. Gordon Bunshaft was sort of the New York equivalent of Mies van der Rohe, although they both would throw up at the mere thought of that sentence being said. But nonetheless, he was incredibly important, a designer for Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, did exceptional work. His first permanent building is in Illinois. It's actually outside Great Lakes Naval Station. Naval Station Great Lakes, as it's called this week. And it was the hostess house. It's where families would come to visit the recruits, the Seabees who were in training. They would come and be in that building, and it had over the years been incredibly remodeled, and no one knew what it was, and it was, discarded in every sense. So it came through our office from a regulatory standpoint, which we have to review federal undertakings. It was owned by the Navy. It still is, still exists, thank God. And they wanted to demolish it, and we said yes. And then I saw the file. I'm like, Jesus, wait a minute. That's that thing. Let's rethink it, which we did, and we rescinded our permission, and now it's slowly being restored as a naval museum. Not that I'm taking credit for its retention, although I am, but it took a whole bunch of work by a number of people and organizations to get that to be retained and then repurposed over many, many years. I think that was 2002 when we first started, and it's still being worked on now. So I would encourage you to drive up there and see it. So it's a great example. It's in Sally Kitt-Chappell's book on Bunshaft. It was misidentified through architectural surveys over the years, and it was only through sort of staring at it going, wait a minute, that looks like that picture that I saw in a book when that's how we figured out what it was. That's what also you can do. Figure it out, talk to people about what they remember about buildings, who did the house, who lived there, who remembers visiting it, what does it look like, what is it? Because none of this is written down anywhere. There's no magic tablet anywhere. There's no Google search that will get you any of these answers. You have to sort of dig it out. And that goes back to the C word I mentioned earlier, context. If you don't know what it is, then you don't know what it is. So that's one example I can point to personally.
But I would say that you do more than you have admitted to here. Because think about, say, the Chicago Athletic Association Hotel. Right, it's very nice. And, so there are buildings that we can experience in cities all over the state that sometimes people who work at the State Historic Preservation Office, they're involved in these projects, whether for historic tax credits or something like that, and they have ideas, you have ideas. And so you say, oh, you might think about doing this, or would try to kind of steer you away from that, and you make helpful suggestions that can make buildings more beautiful. So I think that you may not be able to implement new policy necessarily so easily, preservation policy at the state level, but you can only work on what comes in the door, right? Like you're not out there making edicts and saying this must be preserved. But, when something comes in the door, or when a community says I need help, that's what the State Historic Preservation Office does. But Anthony is correct that you are a big part of preservation, and so serving on preservation commissions or getting involved when there's a public meeting about a road widening project or something in the area that's going to affect something that you care about, get involved. We have an obligation, I think, to do so, to make places better. Princeton, you mentioned Princeton, your hometown. I mean, it's listed in the National Register of Historic Places now. That was a process. And it wasn't a straightforward process necessarily, but I think it's been good for Princeton, and I think people there are very proud of it. Me personally, there's a project that is very dear to my heart, although I don't know where it is right now, and it's something that you can't really see, that I'm aware of. Can you see it yet? Is there anything to see?
Is it subaqueous?
Yeah, it's not subaqueous,
okay.
but it's subterranean. When I worked at the State Historic Preservation Office here in Illinois, I worked on the Springfield Race Riot site, the 1908 Springfield Race Riot.
You can't see it yet.
You can't see it. But the descendant community, people there in the city of Springfield knew it very well and very personally, and generations of pain and hurt. There were a lot of people very interested in that site. It's really, in a historic preservation term, we call it a site. It's really much an archaeological site. And there was a high-speed rail project that was going to, again, demolish it, as it were, going to remove all of the evidence of this event that had happened in this location. And our office had taken a look at it, and I think that they had signed off on it thinking that there would not be much left. And so when archaeologists started working there to document what was there as they were removing it, they uncovered the foundations of 7 houses, I think 7. And they called me one day, and they were getting ready to remove this evidence, if you will. It's evidence of a historic hate crime. And there's this masonry foundation of a very small house, a very modest house with 2 stone steps, and archival research being done by archaeologists. They could identify the occupants of that house by name. They knew their ages. They could tell me that the gentleman who lived in this house was taken out of his house, dragged onto these stone steps that I could see, and that he was beaten, he was hanged to be killed, and he was saved. So it's the home of a survivor. And it was very important to me that it not be extracted, that it not be taken away. So I was very lucky that I had the ability to call the transportation department, the railroad administration, and that they were a good partner. When I said, you need to come and see this, that they came, that they got on a plane and they came, and they agreed. And so, high-speed rail gets stopped, literally stopping the train. There are communities that are upset, and there's money that is being spent or lost. But I think in the end, even though we still can't see it
Yet.
It's covered up, it's protected. I think that it's going to be interpreted in future by Park Service staff who were at the Lincoln home as well. There's some kind of partnership there. So I think that, it's sometimes preservation is for things that you can't see. It's stories, histories that people have not forgotten. I don't know, it's very powerful. Even when you can't see it, it's very powerful, so. Yeah.
Well, and that's really an important point, even aside from the specific example, that a lot of what we do, a lot of what's significant is not visible, or it's not the prettiest thing. So, when I started working on the hostess house, it was an ugly turd, man. It was just not a thing. But it was still a thing. You could see it wasn't all there, but it wasn't all gone. It was an incredibly humble thing in a place where there were beautiful turn-of-the-century buildings with terracotta and beautiful brickwork and so on. Those are obviously historic, right? This was not obviously historic. But I would argue it's far more important than the other kind of pretty buildings over there, because we got a lot of those. We don't got a lot of this one. Or as Rachel's example is, you don't see it, it's archaeology. It doesn't mean that it's any less significant. So aesthetics are important, but they aren't the determiner. They can be, but they aren't always. They don't have to be the determiner of significance. Of course, your building was always pretty.
Beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, but the Edith Farnsworth House took a long time too.
Yeah, its prettiness wasn't a guarantee of preservation.
No, and at the time in 2003, it wasn't considered historic. So, I mean, we're sitting here because we probably all agree that this church is historic, that mid-century architecture is historically significant. That was a new concept, in 2003.
Yeah, it was barely 50 years old at that time.
Yeah, I think that is like the current popular cultural craze for mid-century modern architecture makes it feel current in some ways, and therefore when we also try to historicize it in terms of historic preservation, that I think that sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect. I think our Urbana Civic Center debate that we've been in the middle of for a little while now, and I saw Joseph here somewhere earlier, it is a good example of that there is an assumption that building is not historic and not valuable, but I think the phrase that was just said is like, there's a lot of other things, we don't have many of this, right? That particular way of thinking and designing is represented by this building, by the Civic Center, by the College of Education, by the Assembly Hall, by a few things in this area, but we don't actually have that much of it on an institutional scale. And the other thing you all were just talking about, and I would love to pull a little bit more on this, is the complexity and the bureaucracy associated with preservation and how to navigate it patiently. I serve on the Urbana Historic Preservation Commission. I've only been there about a year or so. I've been in other kind of roles in historic preservation with advocacy groups, on review boards, the kind of complexity of who is advocating for what and who owns what and who to ask and who gets to decide, I think can be really discouraging to people. So I would love, again, a little bit more conversation about successful navigation and patience as an essential part of preservation practice.
I think it's easy to get feel defeated sometimes, or feel like you're the lone voice in the wilderness. But there's strength in numbers, and oftentimes, it takes a little effort to get a group going again after, a generational shift or something. But there's no doubt that there are intelligent people who are sane and rational and highly educated and are not pie-in-the-sky people who are arguing for preserving historic buildings. And sometimes it's just a struggle to get the publicly elected officials to agree.
Well, you can be the publicly elected officials, right? That's the point of it all. So there's that. If you don't do it, if you don't save it, it won't be saved. But also there's the idea that a lot of what I do, because I have to work within the world of statutes and so forth, is reactive. There's very little proactivity that I can do in any real effective way, although people might think it, and as Rachel said, people think that I can stop something. That's not how the laws work. I wish I could, but I'm not the czar of preservation. So a lot of what I usually counsel is figure out what you have. The proactivity needs to take place before someone decides something shouldn't be there anymore. The Urbana Civic Center, if I recall, I think the National Register District was drawn to exclude it because nobody wanted it. Well, what the hell's with that? Who decided that and why, and who was paying attention? I don't know. I mean, it did go through our office, but we're also like, well, if that's what you want, I guess that's what we could do. Not that I was involved in that conversation nonetheless, but I'm saying, if this was a place or had been a place where there was well-known, I'm not saying it wasn't, but well-known public engagement, and this is a historic place and so on and so forth, then it might have been accommodated through a longer-term dialogue, and the worth of it could have been better metabolized on many levels, and blah, 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 and then you're not like, oh my God, the thing is going to be demolished, which is what a lot of preservation battles start with. It would be nice if the preservation battle could have preceded that by a very long time so that that part of it never occurred. Yes, there's a lot of good things come from great buildings that have been lost, whether it's Grand Central Station in New York or the Stock Exchange in Chicago. Every city has the loss of a thing that has catalyzed the preservation movement in that place. Okay, can we get beyond that maybe, you know? I mean, surveying what you have and a better understanding of it, events like this that celebrate what things are while they're being used and engaged with is unbelievably important. Designation by the time it gets to my office is great, but it basically is a confirmation of significance, not a discovery of it. So you're the discoverers, right? You're here. Go figure it out. Jesus, you know, come on, you live here. So it's you know, I don't mean to put it on you, but it's your fault.
But to a certain extent, then you're right. Yeah, I mean, the activity is local. You have a response.
And I don't mean, I'm sorry, I don't mean that you should all buy these houses and live in them. That's, you know, because that's usually the way that not advocates, but opponents are like, well, you should have bought it, and then you could have saved it.
It's not yours.
It's not what I'm talking about.
But I think that there's truth to your comment. You said a true thing.
Oh.
That, you know, once it comes to you, you know, you're not there to make a final decision necessarily. It's the community is sending its preservation wants or desires or needs to the state. And even when it goes up the chain to the Park Service, like if you wanted to list something in the National Register of Historic Places, it's not exactly like a rubber stamp, but it kind of is. I mean, SHPO is the one that says this is what they want to list, you know?
They being the locals.
Yes. And so it really is you getting out there and being like, I don't know, like Ed Boucher, and you could photograph every building on Green Street and then do another project. Maybe the art department needs to get in on this. You know, every building on Orchard Street, but that's what survey is. And the state is not handing out money anymore as fliff a little, but you know, how much money is there to go around? But what a great project. It's like, hey, we'll have a class. We have a survey. Do you have a survey class? What is a survey? How do you do it? How do you make a survey meaningful? How do you make a survey that's worthwhile? And, you know, and it really, everybody's got their phones anyway. So you've all got cameras. You don't need the film isn't expensive anymore. You don't need to make prints. Everybody should be out documenting things all the time. And it really does start with you because you are the ones in your community that are establishing what your needs are. And your community is actually communities, which is why that also can be problematic, right? Because there's all these different perspectives of what histories are meaningful and what you want to save.
And you also are the best definers of what is significant in your communities. I can guess at it, right? I mean, I lived here once a bit, but that doesn't qualify me as a thing. I can bring the C word, the context, but I can't bring the, what's that word I love? Autochthony?
That's the word.
That's the word. So you have to tell us also, and us like, you know, here on the stage us. I mean, that really is right. You're the communicator of what is significant. When I went to school here, I'm like, oh my God, look at all these modern houses. Boy, it's gonna be great when I leave and go somewhere and I can choose to live in a modern, well, I'll tell you what, there isn't as many per capita modern houses anywhere else in Illinois than here, at least not that anyone could afford. So when I moved to Springfield, it was a rude awakening of how much ugly shit there was to live in Springfield in comparison to here, where there's like, that's a cute house, and that's a neat one, and that's good, and there was Small Homes Council, and there was this and that, and all these architects who were building things for themselves and others, and there's, no, that's not reality. So you have this amazing local gold mine of things that you may not be aware of or even admit that is true, but it's true. So a multiple property listing of all the Small Homes Council houses would be great. A multiple property listing of all of the modern architects, professors' houses and commissions would be great, and so on and so forth. And then also, you don't have to believe us, figure it out for yourself. When I got the report for the Urbana Civic Center to look at, the consultant called it postmodern, and I'm like, what planet is this on? You know, so it's not that this phase of architecture is very well documented in terms of the common language that we have to use to describe it in terms of National Register or what I do. So there's what I think it should be called, and it's what someone who read a book once decides to call it, and the thing that they use to say it's not significant, right? So that understanding is also imperative, because if you don't have a language for it, it's hard to describe why it's important.
Yeah, I do think this speaks to the kind of complexity of the process. And so the thing that I would encourage folks to do is what I've been working with my students to do a few things. There's a lot of people here, and there's more things than I can do with my students. And so I think what there is a lack of knowledge of in this community is say everyone here, I give you a homework assignment to go pick something to nominate as a local landmark. Go pick something to nominate to the National Register of Historic Places, and then we'll have a meeting in, September to come and see what everybody thought and put all of those ideas together and then figure out what you do next. Would you be on board for that?
I would love for you to do that.
Okay, because some of that I can do with students, and there's a few folks here who have worked with me this past semester. We've been working on a draft nomination for the Bethel AME Church that is on the open house today, and I know there's many things to do, and we'll get you out of here in a moment. I want to open it up for questions after I say this. But be sure to go to Bethel AME Church. It's a place that I think a lot of people don't know that well, designed by Laz and Edwards, who are post-war architects based here in town and did a lot of amazing institutional work. It is a place that's associated, it's the oldest Black church in Champaign County. It's in its third building on the same site that it's occupied since the 1870s. I think because the building has an addition, we'll have to negotiate a little bit probably with the SHPO as to how we get it landmarks, but we'll do it. And so I think that other groups of people taking on different places and making a list and going through is one thing. Survey is another. And one thing that I think everyone should do if you live in Urbana or Champaign, what's the structure of how this works? Each city has a historic preservation commission that is filled by local people. You can contact the Historic Preservation Commission and tell them that you're interested in landmarking something. If they tell you no, write back and say yes. I would encourage you to contact your city council member about this idea of survey, of being proactive and identifying things now, because I know that the surveys that exist for Urbana and Champaign are pre-war, right? And so our surveys are out of date. They don't contain anything from the mid-century modern period. And so to encourage both Urbana and Champaign to say, hey, proactively, we want to do survey of post-war architecture would be a great thing to do as well. Because again, I can do things with my students, but it really does require all of us to make some progress.
And also find the people who are around to talk about these buildings. Jeff, raise your hand again. Hello, Jeff. He's designed great stuff that has won awards. He's right there. Ask him about it before he's dead, because at that point, you can't do that anymore. Not that I'm wishing that on you, Jeff, God forbid. It's not about that.
Is Russ Dankert in the audience? Yes, and Russ Dankert of Laz, Edwards, and Dankert is here in the audience. And I'm going to talk to you in just a minute. There are folks who have memories of these buildings being built in various ways, and we need to pull those people in for interviews as well. And again, I can talk to some people, but not everyone. Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, though, that the timeline is always moving, and so currently buildings that were completed in 1976 are eligible just by dint of age, that they've reached that minimum age threshold. You can always consider buildings that are even newer, and again, that's why it's Pomo's coming. But don't let age tell you what is historic or what is significant, and be open to looking at properties throughout town that may have meaning or significance to you. And
also, purity isn't necessarily the harbinger of significance either. I'm really fascinated on the shit in the middle. We know about gorgeous, high-style, mid-century, we don't know. Let's just assume that we know. Gorgeous, high-style stuff like this, where it's very sort of lofty in its goals and it achieves those goals. But there was a lot of stuff that was kind of modern, but kind of not, and gee, I don't know about this newfangled modern stuff and how exactly to design it, and the campus is filled with that stuff from the 1940s through the 1960s. Halliburton Root, Shaw Metz and Dolio, these firms that were doing good stuff, but it wasn't high style stuff. It still would get published, right? But it was trying to mediate between this modern and the Georgian stuff, so it's got brick, it's got concrete, and gee, if we make it red with light trim, that's close enough, right? So there's a whole bunch of the home ec buildings and the labs that we're losing, Everett Lab and so on and so forth, is all of this, and it's in the middle. And what is that? People were trying to figure this out. Halliburton Root was filled with people who went to school in the 30s and they were trained in the Beaux-Arts method, and now I got to deal with this modernism crap. How am I supposed to make it look current? Well, those are the buildings that they wound up building, and those are the ones that aren't what Mies looked like and what Philip Johnson or Gordon Bunshaft looked like. But they're fascinating in the dialogue that they're trying to sort out and figure it out. And it's a thing that we don't recognize as modern, but it is. It's certainly mid-century. And so this town is filled with great examples of that.
And I was just saying to you last night, how great is Busey Bank? Hats off to Busey. I love that building. Whose is that? Whose is that?
Who? Which one?
Very
Where?
handsome.
Which one?
Right down here, downtown.
Oh, right down there. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Go give it a hug. Go
Yeah,
hug it.
go give it a hug, exactly.
Yeah, I would love it. So our goal is to get you out of here by noon, which means we have a little bit of time for questions. Question here. I'm going to bring the microphone to you so people can hear the question.
I'd like to know how important to the whole theme of preservation is preserving the original names of the buildings of historic importance. There have been, on the university, for example, campus, the renaming of the Assembly Hall to State Farm, and more recently, the renaming of Memorial Stadium to the name of a donor, changing not only the name, but sort of the significance of the building. So how important is it to maintain the original name of buildings as part of the historic preservation?
I mean, you think you're going to say what I'm going to say? So
Okay. I don't care. No, I'm kidding. In architecture, we always call it what it originally was, and that's a name that sort of is lost over time, or can, and so that makes it difficult. But whoever commissioned it, that was historically the name. And also in terms of houses, certainly the Edith Farnsworth House having that name be the thing, because it was going to be the Farnsworth Palumbo or the Palumbo or house or something like that, which is fine, but recognizing that who actually commissioned it. There was a recent book by a friend of ours, Modern in the Middle, Susan Benjamin, where it was incredibly important to her to name all the houses for the husband and the wife. And so it's not the Mrs. George Martin house, it's the George Martin and Ethel Martin house, or whatever it wound up being. And she said that was extraordinarily difficult to figure out, because it was a commission by two people for themselves, so that was what it should reflect. So in that sense, it's very important to have that sort of understanding in depth. But in terms of how names change over time, I might think it's less important. We could talk about whether public buildings should have the names of donors as a different conversation. That may or may not be what you're asking. But in terms of how the significance of a building might change because its name changes, is less of actually what we talk about.
Yeah, although I still call the Sears Tower, I'm sorry. It's just, and Dyke Stadium.
Right.
But actually, when you're nominating a building to the National Register, there's historic name is the first line, historic name, and it should be the name of the building as it was built. And then if it becomes State Farm Arena, blah, 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 that can be on other name, and you can cram that with as many names as you want. including nicknames. If it has a colloquial name in the community or something, you could add it to that. But I agree with you that names are powerful. And I think that they do a lot to contribute to our sense of place. So.
But the change of a name can also be significant, as you were saying. It's powerful, but it may also indicate change over time and the changing significance of a thing. Something can be significant for its design, which might be seen as a fixed point in time, but there are a whole lot of other ways that something can be significant. And that evolution, the change itself, in some cases, may be what is significant. The original iteration of a thing, meh, but how it changed, now that's the story. And so the name changes might be that route to recognizing that more nuanced but incredibly cool significance.
Great. Other questions? Anyone else? Here. I'll do you next.
It's interesting when I look around here, we're all around the same age. And I don't see anybody that is in their 20s or their 30s, maybe just a few. Okay, 3, 4 people, great. How do you get people, the next generation, how do you get them to really start to embrace preservation?
I think they are.
They are.
They're doing it every day.
All right, anyone who considers himself young, please stand up.
If you can.
Thank you, young people. I think that they are. But you know, when we were introducing ourselves, one thing that got me interested in preservation, was my dad, and just narrating history as we drove around Chicago, and he would tell me what his favorite buildings were, or he would say, "Oh, you've got to go in here," and he would take me into the lobby, and the security guard would be like, "What are you doing in here?" And he would say, "We're just here to look at this." And he loved to communicate his love of the city where he lived. And I guess that's how you get people interested in preservation, is that you constantly tell them what's really interesting and wonderful about where they live, and you try to get them excited about it. I think that's what we do. I think that is what we do.
I would hope.
Yeah.
But how do you get anyone interested in anything? It's relevance, and engagement. This is a great venue. We don't have this in Springfield. So the fact that this is happening is the answer to your question, although I know what you are asking. It's if there was the Rosetta Stone for that, then all nonprofits would be fully staffed with volunteers, and they're not.
But so if it's a material, like I told you to go touch some concrete or put your face really close to it. I mean, if you have a material that you really love, you should let other people know about it and try to get them excited about it. Or like, where's the best stained glass in town? Well, I didn't know. But you just like that.
I would just add that the human connection, biographical history is often the point of contact for younger people to see themselves in a historic place. So invite them in, create opportunities for them to have a voice.
And for me, I don't see these places as, although we often hear, well, preservation is irrelevant because it's not my history, but it's your built environment. And so I approach this in my own head on an aesthetic standpoint a lot, although I appreciate all the other contexts. But I view this as, this shit's here for us. It's meant for us to engage with and experience. So do it. The idea that this is meant for someone else is true from a certain standpoint. But the idea that this is meant for us as an experience is always true, I think. So to have, if you can engage on that level of, this is sculpture meant for you to be in, then that's pretty great as a starting point. All the rest can follow maybe, but for me, it's like, this is here for you, because they wouldn't have built it if whoever the they was, wouldn't have made it a thing if they didn't think that it was a thing to be worth making.
And the other thing I would say is that preservation is not freezing things in amber. It's not keeping it frozen forever in one, so it has a life, and it's part of our daily lives. Preservation is just part of the air we breathe, I think, and it's about, if you see a building, what else could it be? What new life can you give it, but still maintain a sense of continuity and stewarding its delicate materials or its best qualities, and then just try to find creative ways to keep it going. That's what preservation is.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. I was going to pass it here, but I will remind you that houses open at 1 p.m., so we have a minute here after we break up.
All right, hopefully this is quick. You mentioned Champaign as a account mid-century modern structures. What other areas in Illinois have concentrations of rare visits, and is there a preservation movement? One that comes to my mind would be like Riverwoods. It seems like there's a lot of Riverwoods, suburban Chicago.
Riverwoods, Lincoln Woods, Lincoln Wood.
You go on it.
Right.
Yeah. Glencoe. But I was going to say, what? Olympia Fields.
Yes.
Olympia Fields is great on the south side.
Park Forest.
GI Town. Yeah, I mean, there's so much. There's so much. But you said Riverwoods is
Northwest
great.
Indiana, there's a lot in Northwest Indiana. Indiana Landmarks has included a lot of mid-century homes. I was just going to say, to that point, though, one of the best things that I think has come out of every 2 years, the Farnsworth House organizes a tour of mid-century modern homes. We just did Riverwoods last year. And so Chicago Bauhaus and Beyond, some of you may have heard of that, and it's now Chicago Modernist Collective, but it's a social group. They get together, they work with realtors. When cool houses come on the market, they get permission to have a party there. What a great way to not only see the space, but to get together with people who care what you care about and talk about what's happening in your community. Also, SoCo MCM, Southland Collective of Mid-Century Modern. It is in Olympia Fields.
Say again?
SoCo MCM, so Southland Collective of Mid-Century Modern.
What?
Southland, the Chicago Southland. And so that's an hour and 45 minutes on the 57. So there are groups that you could be part of to just have a drink with them, talk about how do you get a group like this started in Champaign-Urbana. I think you should do it.
But there's also cool stuff in Springfield, like Ferry and Henderson stuff.
And I own one of them, so that's, there's another.
It's more than 3 things.
More than 3 things. I was being facetious, but not by much, believe me. But one organization I would point you to just to see how they do it is the Tucson Preservation.
Oh, yeah.
What was it? Tucson Preservation Foundation, I think, which is in Tucson. But they have an annual event where it's scholarly discussions and presentations, and they have a modernism show and house tours. And I mean, it's a bit over the top in some ways, but it also is a really interesting model because it winds up being so sustaining, and there's a lot of volunteers, and they have a lot of content that they can provide year after year. They've asked me to come out and speak. They asked you to come out and speak.
Modernism Week.
And it winds up being, and I like it more than the Palm Springs ones because those are just insane. But the Tucson one winds up being as rooted in the actual places as anything. And I think there's less of a sort of armature about it. I could be wrong. But anyway, I'm not saying replicate it. I'm saying that's a good one to look at to see how that event works annually.
And I just wanted to say thank you, Kate, for making this happen, and for the County Historical Society, and thanks to the university. But I really do hope this becomes an annual event. I really, really do. Mm-hmm. And thank you for stewarding preservation at U of I yet again. Really wonderful. So just I really appreciate all of that. Thank you all for being here. I'm really glad to see you.
So I have to say, I'm incredibly heartened by how many people are here. So if it's the time of day when we clap frequently. So please clap for yourselves. I am very impressed that you're here. Thank you to Scott, Anthony, and Rachel for the conversation. It's very inspiring and a little bit of a get up and go that's much needed. So thank you very much.
What we say in preservation is the only one who's going to save your community is you. So Do it. Do it or stop bitching.
I also want to thank our sponsors. Again, Champaign County History Museum is main organizer. All funds go to them and their programming. Preservation Association, Conservation, Good Housekeep. Thank you again to Anna and the team. School of Architecture, Tori Beach is doing our videography. Thank you, Tori, up there in the balcony. Michael Hogue, Remax, who I would not live in a Jack Baker house if Michael Hogue had not said, do you like weird houses? Would you like to see one? Which, I mean, the answer to that is always yes. Needful Things Warehouse Gallery and Furniture Lounge, who is your source for all mid-century things to bring home with you. Thank you to everyone. It is a collaborative effort, and I'm serious. Like if I send you homework, which is like tell me the top 5 places you think should be a landmark historic district, and we meet again in September, we'll send an email out to everybody who registered, and we'll follow up. You can come back in September.
And
Please
if you
join
like a
us.
house, knock on the door.
Yes. I've done that.
Yes.
Do that.
Not to buy, just to see it.
Just to
say
see,
hi.
just to see if someone will answer the door. Yeah. Okay. All right. That is an indication that it is noon.